What is way more common than people realize? Professional incompetence. On all levels, from cashiers at McDonald's to nuclear scientists. The difference is in how the organization handles and mitigates failure. Not having any friends when you're older. After you graduate college, especially if you move to a new city for a job, it's hard to maintain friendships. And it's definitely hard to get new friends once you're in the adult world working every day. Many people's only friend is their spouse. And if they aren't married, many people just don't have any friends. People who don't wash their hands after using the restroom. Alcoholism. There are many more functional alcoholics or recovering than people would guess. Miscarriage. The Mayo Clinic says up to 20% of known pregnancies end in miscarriage, which is already a lot. This is obviously heartbreaking for wanted pregnancies, but can be difficult for unwanted pregnancies too. But in addition to that 20%, many people miscarry before they learn they're pregnant. While not distressing in the same way of knowingly having a miscarriage, it's distressing for many people because of a seeming inability to get pregnant. Feeling lonely. Even if you're married or with kids, etc. Credit card debt. 45% of Americans carry a credit card balance from one month to the next. The number of people being left behind by services going digital. They come into the library where I volunteer to find help. Not only do some of them not have email addresses, and most of the ones who do rely on the computer remembering their passwords, a significant number don't even have mobile phones. People being ashamed of things they like. Pro wrestling, tabletop games, types of media, anime, reality TV, etc. People are way more insecure about people getting a peek at their true selves than people realize. Imposter syndrome. No one knows what we are doing. We are all just winging it. Most of us are hoping that asking questions and being nice will get us there. Mental health problems. People see the TV show and think those are isolated incidents. But ask your local fire and EMS providers, and watch the horror creep across their faces. I've been in houses where you couldn't actually touch the floor, you walked on top of the debris. Houses where the door they use is the only door or window in the entire residence that can be opened. Houses where we had to station firefighters every couple feet along the path through the mess, and load the patient onto a megamover, basically a heavy-duty sheet with grab handles on the sides, and pass her person to person out the door. Grown folks failing to look up anything on their own, or calling ahead to see if a place is open. The amount of times I got screamed at already this week for why you were closed on Monday? Ma'am/sir, it's a federal/national holiday that's been in effect for longer than you and I have been alive. Also, we posted signs stating such on every entrance/exit door on the building on Friday morning. They were still up on Tuesday when we returned to work. Screaming at a random person because you were either woefully ignorant or didn't think to call ahead and then didn't read the signs plastered all over just makes you look unhinged. Plus, you made a trip today for nothing because the item you're looking for still isn't in yet. Had you called ahead, you wouldn't have wasted your time, energy, and gas getting here for nothing. Label decide cobweb political complete rustic advise reply ancient school. People in recovery for drugs or alcohol. Once I joined AA and started getting sober, I realized just how many of us there are. I also randomly meet tons of people in recovery just when I share I'm sober with people. We are everywhere. Maladaptive daydreaming, particularly after childhood trauma. The only way some kids can get through horrific childhoods is by detaching themselves from the reality of their situation. They create intricate fantasies as a sort of virtual reality to escape into. These fantasies are so detailed and vivid, they become your primary reality. It can be hard to let go of this coping strategy in adulthood because the world in your head feels more real and safer than the outside world. You can lose entire days to maladaptive daydreaming. It impacts your sleep because you can't shut your mind off. It impacts your friendships because you don't want to communicate with the outside world and makes you mentally foggy. At its worst, you don't eat properly, or at all, take care of your hygiene or surroundings. It's not like normal daydreaming, it can ruin your life and interfere with everything you do. I live with maladaptive daydreaming and almost fucked my whole life up because of it and know other people who have been through similar. On the plus side though, maladaptive daydreaming can lead to amazing creativity if you can learn to control it rather than letting it control you. People not knowing about whatever the current activism is on social media. Big example is the Starbucks/McDonald's boycott. Everyone online is convinced it's a huge boycott, yet most people in the real world do not know a thing about it. People forget that not everyone is online 24/7, and just because you know about something doesn't mean others do if they're not in that same online circle. Stupidity and apathy. So many people you encounter in your day-to-day life are either idiots or just do not care. The kid at the drive-thru you thought was a dick. I don't care. The employee that made you add signs and rules like don't shit in the company shower, stupid. Diamonds, the entire industry is a sham. A handful company controls a near monopoly on the market and artificially inflates the price of stones by buying up all the raw diamonds they can and only selling a small fraction to the public. Celebrities related to other celebrities, movie stars being the child of two other movie stars, and just general inside connections being a pretty major factor in who gets to be on screen. If you're wondering how the semi-conscious wooden plank Dakota Johnson got to be the star of the garbage pile movie Madam Web, she is the child of Don Johnson and Meg Ryan. Autism in women. Sure, TikTok etc. is making this omnipresent in a stupid, possibly dangerous way, but it's a reaction to growing up in a world where it was thought only boys could be on the spectrum. All my teachers knew something was wrong with me, but never what specifically, and I had a real hard time as a teen. As an adult, I've sought out a diagnosis, but because I've had so many shifting and conflicting mental health diagnoses, it makes it really hard. I'll probably never get a formal diagnosis, but if they could see how some of the older people in my family were, there would be no question. Mental illness. Most people hide it. Domestic abuse and violence. Good people. Seriously, I think over 90% of us are at least decent. People look at politicians and celebrities and other extremely public people and think everyone is like that. For some reason we haven't figured out how to do government or business without the worst people making it to the top, but I still believe most of us are more good than bad. Even a good portion of Trump voters probably aren't doing it for nefarious reasons. They're just uninformed or ignorant and have bought into the lies. Cynicism is a major problem in the world because it stalls or halts progress. To improve anything, you need to believe it can be improved. Idealism alone won't solve things, you have to act on it and apply it correctly, but cynicism can never solve anything. Abnormal amounts of dissociation. Many go their entire lives without ever realizing it's not how most people function. You have to do a lot of research into how and why it's not to fully understand, which only makes it worse. If you don't want to find out, I understand. It's not life-threatening or anything insane like that, it's just, it answers so many questions we have about a lot that could be wrong with us. Hard for Gen Zs to comprehend, but in the 70s and 80s and 90s your grandparents and parents were way more sexually active and adventurous than you guys are. The seat warmer in the car making you feel like you need to poop. Dead serious, hairy nipples on women. My doctor was shocked and was convinced my hormones were off. Nope. Just my genetics. Normally I would pluck, like many women, but I wasn't very well at the time. But he had clearly never seen the boobs of a woman who hadn't. Women being abusive. I work in family law, and plenty of women are abusers too, it's not just men. It's just still so stigmatized for men to speak up about it. And the problem is, people who are abusers already know how to manipulate others in an attempt to exonerate themselves of any wrongdoing. Most women abusers know if they act helpless and scared of their ex, even when they have zero reasoning as to why, people will feel bad for them and demonize the guy. Crocodile tears are a very real thing, and people of all genders and identities will absolutely outright lie about an ex to try to save their own reputation. I've seen it a million times. Obviously plenty of men abuse too, and it's a very real problem. And plenty of guys will lie about being victims too in an attempt to manipulate others. My whole point is, it doesn't come down to men versus women versus non-cisgender, etc. It comes down if you're narcissistic at your core to abuse in the first place. Chin hairs on women. I'm a dental hygienist and I see them on 90 to 95% of my female patients, and I sometimes wonder how many women feel self-conscious about it. Well, I am here to tell you that it's normal and none of us judge you or find your witch hairs interesting in the slightest. Honestly, the same goes for a lot of things on your face that a lot of people worry about when going to the dentist. We may notice it, but it isn't nearly as exciting as the fuzzy biofilm lurking on your second molars. Borderline personality disorder. Takes a long time to be diagnosed and often misdiagnosed for a long time. If people are really unwell, they may not seek treatment. Understanding of the disorder is still emerging. Sleep apnea and other sleep disorders. It took me 3 years to get diagnosed because my symptoms were dismissed as depression, because I didn't have any of the sleep apnea risk factors, and because I had a previous history of depression, despite my initial insistence that I dealt with depression before, and this was different. I guess I eventually started believing them. Then I got a new psychiatrist. I told her I was having a depressive episode. She asked me about my symptoms, and all the symptoms that she asked about, either I wasn't experiencing them, or they were the direct result of being tired all the time, e.g. I hadn't so much lost interest in activities, I was just too tired to do anything. She told me that it sounded more like I was describing a sleep disorder than a depressive episode, and referred me to a sleep lab. She said she ends up referring a lot of her patients to sleep labs, and another friend of mine who was a psychiatry resident said he also ends up diagnosing sleep apnea a lot. Sleep disorders can mimic or exacerbate the symptoms of mental illnesses, so I guess it takes a psychiatrist to tell when someone isn't depressed. Being gifted, we aren't gifted. They just didn't know what to do with us when we already knew the material. Not eating enough fiber. I read once that something crazy like over 90% of North Americans don't eat enough of it, and I think about it all the time. Double standards. Your chances of becoming homeless in the United States are far greater than becoming a millionaire, or even making $100,000. Endometriosis. 10% of all people AFAB either have or will develop it in their lifetime. 40% of those with endometriosis have chronic pain. There is no cure for it. Kinks and fetishes. I think because it's considered taboo to talk about sex and God forbid anything out of the ordinary, a lot of people hide their sexual fantasies. I think anyone has a non-standard turn on, just not everyone is honest. Sometimes even not to yourself. Miscarriages, they happen very, very often. It sucks when it happens to you, and not a lot of people speak about it, but most of the time it's just bad luck and does not mean something is wrong with you or you did something bad. It's concerning if it happens multiple times in a row though. Neurodivergence, especially autism, for so long the majority of the studies have been in low-functioning individuals where the stats are about 1 in 100. ADHD, the official stat, is about 5% of the population. I work in schools and my cousin is on the low end of high-functioning autism, so I sorta know what to look for. My guess is that kids who are on some neurodivergence spectrum are probably closer to 1 in 11, most of them just mask. Bisexuality and pansexuality. Many people who think they are straight or gay either have a strong preference for one sex/gender or have never given themselves a chance to consider alternatives. Propaganda. Most of us realize that there's a lot of it, but I think most don't understand that it's everywhere. Too many people like to think they're too smart to fall for propaganda, not realizing just how pervasive it actually is. Women dying in childbirth. It used to be a 50% chance you would die in childbirthing. The USA maternal mortality rate for 2021 was 32.9 deaths per 100,000 live births, compared with a rate of 23.8 in 2020 and 20.1 in 2019. Abortion is actually better for women's health. The major complications that account for nearly 75% of all maternal deaths are too severe bleeding, mostly bleeding after childbirth, infections, usually after childbirth, high blood pressure during pregnancy, preeclampsia and eclampsia, complications from delivery, and unsafe abortion. About a quarter of mothers from privileged English households in the 17th and 18th century died of childbirth complications. Corruption and dishonesty. It's not just the politicians, it's your boss, your contractors and inspectors, your neighbor, cashiers, etc. A lot of folks, for good and bad reasons, just do what they need or want to do with no concern for what is right or legal. It's about what they can get away with. I used to think most folks were honest. I have discovered that I was wrong. Slipping over and dying. People dying every day just from a clumsy trip. Serious injury or deaths at the utilities company. I am not trying to say it is a bloodbath, or even being critical. Accidents happen. But when I worked for the local utilities company, there were more serious accidents and deaths of line, wire, and gas workers than you hear about on the news. As I said, not terrible, but you would hear about 1 or 2 a year, when there were more like 5. Happiness and mental health. The news and Reddit tend to focus on bad things and miserable people, but out in the real world, most people are, like, fine. Not always swimming in piles of cash or euphoric like influencers would have you believe, but comfortable and getting by fine. This is not to say that we shouldn't have compassion for people who are struggling. But it's important to remember that everyone out there isn't on the verge of suicide or abject poverty every single day. Fluidity in human sexuality. People experiment or at least fantasize about same-sex/gender partners, or at least be willing to try in certain circumstances, way more often than most people would be willing to admit. Sexuality labels/identifications don't exactly rule out a person's ability and willingness to try, because many people are disingenuous about their own self-identification out of fear of stigma, or the way they define sexuality is by a different metric than what's commonly known. Many people will say, yeah, I did do X with someone, but because I didn't do Y or I didn't feel emotions towards said gender, only sexual relied, then it doesn't count. Their definition of what counts as gay, straight, or bisexual is different, or they just self-limit because they prefer the more traditional opposite-sex marriage to be their eventual lifestyle, and not define themselves by things they do for fun. And it's way more common than you think, whether it's in countries with sexual freedom or repressive ones. Porn addiction. Disability. There are so many invisible disabilities. 25% of the population ends up disabled at some point, and a lot of those people haven't even reached middle age yet. Incest, unfortunately. My doctor said that when he was studying in the 60s, they thought it was 1 in 100,000 across North American populations. Now it's known to be as high as 1 in 10. The amount of doctors who loosely tell people you will likely struggle with having children, so the individual believes they are impotent or barren, and that information is wrong. If no test was done, don't listen to the assumption of Dr. Dumbass. He cannot tell by looking at you that your organs won't procreate, unless your organs are not attached to you. Spit. People spit a lot when talking. It goes mostly unnoticed and even invisible to the naked eye. Sometimes when someone is yelling or singing or has the light just right, you can easily see it. But it is always there even when you don't see it. Inarticulacy. People can't communicate. Failing to communicate, they either get angry or give up, plus they can't listen. Being unable to convey to others and simultaneously being unable to listen, they are functionally hopeless. And often angry about it. Affairs. Sometimes the other partner never finds out, other times the couple work through it and stick together, but it's seldom talked about openly and honestly. The amount of people drunk during the day or just drinking while out and about. I work at a liquor store, and the amount of people buying shots of liquor/multiple beers on their lunch break? A lot. Mental health issues. I can't speak for the whole world, but here in the US, there is such a stigma about mental illness that you really can't tell anyone when you're suffering, because it can cost you your job, your relationship, even custody of your children, so we're expected to hold it all in and deal with it ourselves, even when we're not equipped to, despite the fact that most people deal with some form of mental illness at some point in their lives. Perfect pitch. I used to think it was like a handful of savants, but it's closer to 0.01% of the population, or 1 in 10,000. While that number seems low, that's still like 800,000 people with absolute pitch. People buying expensive things simply because they like nice things. And they can easily afford them. Much more common than most people think. College degrees. If it's not a PhD or at least a master's but in a science field, it's really not that uncommon to have one. Lactose intolerance. It's estimated that 65% of adults worldwide are lactose intolerant. I was in denial about it for a long time, but I finally tried cutting out lactose-containing dairy, and it made a huge difference. For me, the lactase pills help, but not as much as just avoiding lactose. A lot of fetuses self-abort before even making it a couple of weeks because the body either rejects it or the fertilized egg isn't strong enough to survive. They happen way more than people think. A lot of times, a woman doesn't even know she is pregnant and just passes it as eclatas. Usually they're about the size of one normally when the body rejects them at an earlier stage. Sometimes, especially when a couple is trying to have a baby, when the woman starts her period, it's kinder to let her think that she started her period than the more likely event that it was a miscarriage. That's how often they are. Autism. A lot of people have high-functioning autism. To normal people, we seem like assholes because we say things that aren't socially appropriate. To us, we don't realize that it's inappropriate. Feeling shame about the smallest things in your life. Feeling like you have no idea what you're doing. Infidelity. My husband and I are polyamorous, and I can't even tell you the amount of people who told us there's no way we could be in love and want to hook up with other people. Were literally the same people, men and women, who would try to hook up with me when they were too drunk to remember. Mind you, they are all people in monogamous relationships. Misinformation. Also bots. So many bots. The way Redditors talk, smokers. I've seen so many discussions on Reddit that millennials rarely smoke. It's a big show of class divide because living in poverty, most workplaces have at least a couple smokers, even more if working in a service field. People identifying as anything other than heterosexual/straight in our current society. Way more people out there who are gay, or lesbian, or bi, or pansexual, or trans, or sexual/gender fluid. Whether they've publicly identified or not is a different conversation. But yeah, in short, gay people are way more common than people realize. To be honest, disabled people. For far too long, the stereotype of you have to be in a wheelchair to be disabled has been the unsaid rule, but it's simply not true. It's weird because at the same time, there are certain illnesses that don't require said wheelchair but people still classify them as disabilities, for example epilepsy, ulcerative colitis, cancer, etc. Far more people are disabled than you realize. What's even crazier is that some people don't even realize that they're disabled. I genuinely had one friend who didn't think of themselves as such, but when I relayed all their ailments to them, they realized, oh shit, maybe I am. Men who spend absurd amounts of money on OnlyFans, at least according to bank reports. Polyamory. Maybe it's just my friends group, but at least half of my friends are polyamorous in some way. They are in multiple relationships or else have several people who they are in sexual relationships with. This isn't as rare as people think. Sure, many are more old-fashioned since they cut those off when they start a steady relationship, but swinging, open relationships and many more variants of polyamory are still very common. House fires. They happen every day in your town, they're just not reported by the news unless it's a very large fire or a slow news day. Serious marital problems, like I am on the verge of divorce again. I find out loads of other couples have been there, but we only hear about actual divorces. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel by clicking here, and hit the bell icon to get notified whenever I post a new video. Check out these videos for more content you might enjoy. See you in the next video.
I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't that great. I don't wanna go to work, cause my boss is a jerk, and I'm not even that paid. I need a change in my life, cause I don't feel alive, and there's nothing that makes me